Welcome to the You Can Mentor podcast. Zach Garza here. I am with Mike McGarry from Youth Pastor Theologian. Mike, say hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Doing well today, Mike. So I came across Mike and his all of his stuff a couple months ago, and I just absolutely loved it. Like anyone who's been doing youth ministry for almost 20 years, I mean, they have a seat at my table. So I'm super excited about finding out more about Mike and what he does. But yeah, Mike, happy happy podcast day, my friend.
Yeah, man, I've been looking forward to this for a while since we connected. So yeah, it's good to see your face and to finally meet you.
Oh, thanks, man. So Mike McGarry is out of the Boston area, and he has served as a youth pastor for 18 years. He's married. He has a couple kiddos at home who are teenagers. He is a ordained pastor. He has a doctorate in ministry with a focus on ministering to emerging generations. He has written, is it 4 books, Mike?
Yeah, the fourth is coming out in a couple months.
And so he's an author, and he is just passionate about all things youth ministry, youth mentoring, building relationships with kids, exposing them to the Bible and the gospel, and helping them have a faith that is deep enough to carry them into adulthood. So Mike, so tell us how you got started with all this.
Yeah. I live in Massachusetts, which is, always ranked up there in most pagan places of America. And so when I was a teenager, I grew up in church. My parents divorced when I was in middle school. And my youth pastor was just really faithful and mentored me and had a really big impact in my own life and my own faith development. And my group of friends it sounds like the beginning of a really bad joke. I was an evangelical Christian. Other friends were kind of mainline liberal Protestant, a few Catholics, an atheist, a Buddhist, and a Jew. And this was just my group of friends. Like whenever we would hang out, like this was my crew. And so, I mean, faith and ethics and debates about whatever's going on in the world, the stuff comes up. And so from an early age, when I was a teenager, I really just had to be able to know what do I actually believe and how do I talk about that in a way with unbelievers that is both unashamed of being biblical and having to tell your best friends when they ask you point blank, so you think that if we all got in a car crash on the ride home tonight, that you are the only one, like you are the only one who would be going to heaven and we would all be going to hell. And as a teenager, how do you answer that question? And as a teenager, just having to say, this is why I keep trying to spark conversations about Jesus and why I think it matters so much, because I don't want that to be the case for you. Right. So I think that shapes you in some really interesting ways. So as when I did become a youth pastor, um, and it's still kind of in the same general areas where I grew up. So, it's very post-Christian. Going to church is not cool. No one goes to church just because like that's where all your friends are. Like if you're going to church, it's pretty much because you're forced to by your parents or because you want to be there. So how are we helping kids to really know what they believe, why, and equipping them to talk about it with others who just kind of shrug and go, whatever. So that's some of my background that I bring into youth ministry and then why I started Youth Pastor Theologian, because I think it's just really important that kids know what it means to actually be a Christian.
So tell me some ways that your youth pastor kind of helped shape you and help you answer those super difficult questions.
Yeah. I mean, Craig, so much of it's the ministry of presence,
Yeah.
right? I mean, so here I am, the guy with a doctorate who writes theology books for teenagers. and who leads a ministry called Youth Pastor Theologian. And I mean, the ministry of presence is so foundational for youth ministry and youth mentoring and youth discipleship and youth event. Like it really is. It's relationships, right? And being there. And Craig was there, right? I mean, simply put, Craig was there. So when life hit the fan and things started to blow up, he was there. And when things were good and really like banging, he was there too. And so yeah, when I had questions and I didn't know who to talk to, um, I could talk to Craig, and I knew that he would listen. And he I love Craig. If he finds this and listens, Craig, I love you, right? I don't think he would be the first one to say, "I'm not a theologian," right? He said, "I love doctrine, I love the Bible, I love Jesus." Um, right? He's not writing any theology books, but he loves Jesus. He loves God's word, and he loved me, and that's what it took.
Man, like, that's why we're called You Can Mentor,
Yeah.
because whenever I first started to mentor, I was all about, I've I've gotta be cool, I gotta have the right conversations, I have to engage them, we have to have a great time,
Mhm.
and what I found out over time was, man, I think 80%, maybe even more of being a good mentor is just showing up with a smile on your face,
Yep.
just over and over and over, and it doesn't matter if they're making straight A's, it doesn't matter if they, are, um, you know, trying to fail out of school. Like, if you can just show up, and if you can just help them experience Jesus in your relationship,
Right.
then God tends to show up and do amazing things. So,
Yeah, well, and I would even qualify and say it's not always about showing up with a smile on your face. Sometimes it's just about showing up. And if you're just painting on a fake smile on your face, they would rather you just show up
yeah.
um with a cloud over you and with some vulnerability, maybe even just, you got to be appropriate, you know. But to just say, "Yeah, man, I'm here and I want to be here." It's just not really a great day, but I'm here and I'm happy to be here, you know?
Like, I think so much of mentoring is also just, like, inviting them into your life,
Yeah.
and you are gonna have good days, you are gonna have
Yep.
bad days, but if you can just be kinda like what you were saying, authentic, if you can be kind of vulnerable with them and
Yeah.
just say, "Hey, look, like, here, like, this is what it's like to have a full-time job. This is what it's like to be married. This is what it's like to have some kiddos."
Yeah.
I mean, for some of our kids, they don't know anyone like that, and so,
Mhm.
um yeah, but that's awesome, man.
Yep.
Well, so tell me, just like, whenever someone comes to you and they're like, "Hey, I'm a youth pastor, or I work with kiddos," what are some of the most common kinds of questions that people tend to ask you?
Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's what you already kind of got at and saying like, okay, so I want to do a better job with discipleship in my youth ministry because that's generally the sphere that I'm in, right? So it's usually a youth pastor coming to me saying, "Hey, I really want to strengthen the youth ministry, the discipleship, the Bible teaching. What do I do?" As if there's like, here's the secret sauce, or here's the special formula to use. Sprinkle in a little bit of this and that, stir for 30 seconds, and out pop well-formed lifelong disciples. If only, right? So usually it's a slower process of just thinking about like, okay, so what is Christianity? Do we have a clear answer for just what does it mean to be a Christian? And then what does it mean to become a mature Christian? Um, And then how do we evaluate kind of just where the kids in our lives or the students in our ministries are? Um, and so if we don't know where we're going, and if we don't know where they are, then how do we bring them anywhere that's on purpose? Otherwise, we're kind of just, I don't know, nomads or wandering or just
Yeah.
hoping that we're doing Christian things, therefore discipleship happens.
Yeah.
So yeah, I generally encourage people to think through. Um, I know it's kind of cliche, but head, heart, hands. And so as you think about what is a Christian, I think it really boils down to Christian doctrine, like ahead. What do kids know? Just basic Christian doctrine. And I think the Apostles' Creed really has been the go-to statement of what the core heart of Christian doctrine is throughout church history. So the apostles didn't write the Apostles' Creed, but early Christians did. Shows up in the earliest parts of it show up in the late 200s, which isn't that far after the time of the apostles, but it was a verbal tradition, right? That reflects the message that the apostles taught. And so this goes back very, very early to this is what Christians have always agreed upon together. This is what it means to be a Christian. So are we teaching and helping our kids to talk through that, not just to memorize it, but to be able to memorize it is good, but also to be able to for them to articulate and explain this is what that line means. This is what that line means. And this is what that, right? This is the discipling in Christian doctrine in terms of the heart really has to do with spiritual formation is typically what it's called today. I like talking about just spiritual vitality. That just seems a bit clearer and less fuzzy and mushy to me. But like, what is our relationship with God like throughout church history? That's usually been taught through things like the Lord's Prayer. Like, are we teaching kids how to read their Bible? Are we teaching kids how to pray? Is there any life and vitality in their relationship with the living God? Or are we just so focused on teaching doctrine that Christianity is just a good idea, but little more than a good idea? And then the last element that I usually point people towards has to do with hands, right? Head, heart, hands. And that has to do with Christian living, right? That what does it mean to live for God? And again, in church history, that's usually been taught through the Ten Commandments. And so when we look at the Ten Commandments, like what does it just mean to live as a Christian? What is the cost of discipleship? As some have said, right? So um, these are the things that Christians do. These are the things that Christians don't do. Do you just want Jesus to swoop in and to save you when you die, but to make no demands now? Like that's not what it means to live for Jesus. That's not what it means to have a Christian heart. And so when we think through what does it mean to be a Christian, head, heart, hands, Christian doctrine, Christian vitality, Christian living, when we have a clearer picture about where are we trying to lead them to, then we can have a bit of a clearer vision to see them and where they are now so that we can just come alongside, not as professors, but as mentors and as adult friends to help guide and shepherd them to talk through kind of where they are, help them see where they are. And do they want to stay there or do they want to grow?
Those are all awesome things, Mike. And
Yeah, I just threw a
I
lot
mean,
at you.
no, it's absolutely fantastic. Like, it's because one thing that's so, I mean, it is hard enough to mentor a kid that you might not have a bunch in common with, right? And especially if it's one-on-one mentoring, like you are
Right.
meeting with a kid, you guys don't know each other, it's one-on-one, it could be kind of awkward. And now you're supposed to talk about Jesus? Like, oh man, I'm about to make this even more awkward, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, our heart here is that not not only would every kid have a mentor, but every kid would have a mentor who's helping them know Jesus Christ, right? And so, what would you say is the first step in kind of assessing your mentee's relationship with Jesus? Like, where are they spiritually, right?
Yeah. Um, I don't know if it's stupid answer or not, but just ask them, right? Like, how would you define and describe your relationship with God? Um, if we can't ask that question, then we're never going to make progress with other questions about faith, right? I mean, that shouldn't be a super intimidating, uncomfortable question. It might be awkward,
Yeah.
but I hope it's not uncomfortable. Um, that we as the mentors should be. I hope we're not perfect. We're not you know holy saints or whatever. But hopefully we are secure enough in our own faith that we're comfortable and have a desire to talk about our faith with these students. So asking a simple question like, "Hey, hey Zach, I'm a Christian. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. I was curious, how would you describe your relationship with God? And is that something that you'd like to talk about more?" And that and how the way they answer that question will tell you a lot, right? If they get
Right.
super weirded out and then they start ignoring you, that tells you something.
Mhm.
Um, or if they kind of just breathe a sigh and they're like, you know what? Yeah, I have a lot of questions, and I'm not really sure where I stand. Or if they're like, oh yeah, like go to church every week, and yeah, I think it's good. Or like, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
just
yeah.
the way they answer that broad question can help direct you in where to take conversations from there.
So, like, tell me what you would do, Mike, if like you ask that question and a kid just has no clue how to answer it, and there's like, or I don't want to say that they're against it, but they feel so uncomfortable talking about that they
Mhm.
either like shut down or they try to change the subject or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, well, I think those are some different scenarios, right? I mean, if it's a matter of them just not knowing how to answer the question, um, that might be something where you can just say, like, if they're like, "I don't really even know how to answer that." You could just say, like, Is that something that you'd be interested in talking about sometime?" I'm not gonna sit here and say that's all we're ever gonna talk about, but, is that something that you're interested in discussing? Or would you like to hear a little bit about my own journey in my relationship with God? Like, would that be helpful? Right? So that can help open that up. If they're antagonistic about it and they just don't want anything to do with Jesus, I mean, your options are a little bit limited in terms of spiritually mentoring them. I mean, you can't disciple someone who doesn't want to be discipled. But we shouldn't just treat people like projects either. And so if they're spiritually closed, you don't just try to kick the door down, but you also don't abandon them. Um, and so just keep showing up. And if the Lord has placed a burden on your heart for this particular student, pray for them, right? I mean, that's not the last thing that we do. That should be the first thing that we do in mentoring is praying for them. Do we really believe that their heart is in the Lord's hands first and foremost, right? So pray that God would work in them, on them, um, and just keep showing up as you're able. And I wouldn't press it too often, but I also would be very weary and cautious against just dropping spiritual things entirely because kids don't just need um adult friends, right? Like if you want to be their mentor, then you need to be their mentor, not just their buddy. And I have seen youth workers fall into the place where a kid was spiritually closed, so then they just became a buddy, and now they're kind of like peers with each other, and the kid is now in the driver's seat of that relationship. Um, and it can get kind of weird, you know? So I would just be careful against that. But yeah, don't give up on them. Don't give up on spiritual conversations. Pray for wisdom about how best to handle those. And pray for them. Pray for that kid and pray for the Lord to open up um, natural conversations. And too, like if you see movies or you're listening to music or whatever, for your own worldview, like if there's stuff in these movies or whatever that for you does spark a thought about your own faith, that's a natural thing for you to bring up in conversation with that student.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Like I was just thinking, if you're having conversations and a kid does something funny or, maybe they're artistic or maybe they're creative, like if you can somehow encourage them in that and kind of point them to God, like, hey, like, that's awesome that you're so funny, or that's awesome that you're so this and that, you you do know that like that's how God created you. And like that's an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And so, which I mean, speaking of that, Mike, like you just are um about to put out a book
Well,
about helping kids experience that aspect of God in them, right?
yeah. Yeah, I just finished writing it. It's in with the publisher for review and editing and all that fun stuff. But I'm really excited. It's coming out in August. So it's called Iconic: Being God's Image in Your World. Iconic is about what does it mean that we are created in the image of God. And as a book that's written for teenagers and young adults. So 13 through 25-year olds, roughly is who I had in mind as I was writing it. In all these conversations about identity formation and who am I, who am I, who am I, that we're just constantly surrounded by. And it's a really important question. But just kind of burdened that before we start asking, who am I, we really need to ask the question, what am I? Like, what does it mean to be a human being? And that's something that we've lost. That's a question that we just don't ask anymore. And if we've forgotten what we are as humans and what we are as people, men and women who are created in the image of God, then we're always going to struggle to answer the question, who am I, if we've forgotten what am I as an image bearer. Um, so the book's driving at kind of what does it mean for us to be and to bear the image of God. And so, yeah, just in brief, um, yeah, getting at was that what we are is the image of God, and in the sense that we are iconic, right? Like, we are living, walking icons of God in this world. And so the Greek word for image is actually the Greek word icon. That's where icon comes from. And so what we are is living embodiments, living icons that God has put in this world to represent him. And one of the things that's interesting when I was digging into it in scripture is one of the places where that word shows up in the Old Testament is the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar, right? That the Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, like they would not bow down to the icon, to the statue of Nebuchadnezzar, and that's something that kings would do. they would build statues of themselves and put it in different places, key places around their empire, to remind the people there who was in charge. And every so often, the people would be expected to pay honor and to show their respect to the icon, to the image of their king, showing that they recognize who's in charge and they know who their king is. And this is who and what we are. That we are living icons of God, living in this world. And this is part of why in the Ten Commandments it says, don't make any graven images. God has already made one for this world. And that's what we are as human beings. And so no matter who you are, um, how far you are from godliness, um, what you are is an image bearer. Um, if you have, if there's someone with severe disability who the world looks at and says they contribute nothing to society, that person bears God's image just as much as the godliest person you know. They have equal dignity and honor as a human being. And yet at the same time, sin has corrupted our ability to bear God's image faithfully. So instead, we are icons of God who then try to make ourselves the kings of our own little kingdoms where we've been planted. And because we're living statues, right? We're living icons. And so sin has corrupted what is in us that should direct others to God. And that's where our identity comes in, right? So is my identity that of a Christian who wants to embody and represent the goodness and the glory of Jesus Christ to those around me? Or am I trying to be self-iconic? Or do I want to be iconic of Christ in my school, in my community, on my team, in my family? What does it mean for us to be iconic as Christians? So that's what that book is about. And I just think it's a really important conversation for us, especially in terms of mentoring, right? When you can mentor. Um, yeah, I think a lot of these questions have to do, a lot of these conversations that we have with kids has to do with identity and who am I and what do I want to do when I get older and where am I going to college and all these really big and important questions. I just think that there are some foundational conversations that would be good for us to have that I think we've just kind of forgotten are worth having, or we don't know how to have them at all. So yeah, this book would be helpful to read with a student, and to discuss it together.
Man, Mike, well, I'm excited about reading that, man. Like, anytime that we can point our mentees back to identity, anytime that we can kind of show them, like, hey, like, this is how God created you, and it's a beautiful thing. Like, why don't you let me show you some more awesome things about God, right? And so, just you can't go wrong as a mentor pointing out the good things in them that are like Christ, and
Hmm.
we hope that that kind of opens up the door for them to hear more
Yeah.
about Jesus.
Yeah.
And so, um, man, gonna be a good read, Mike. I'm excited to pick it up. But
Yeah.
like, I think one thing that I have had a hard time with, right? Because, like, I mean, I'm gonna be honest with you. Sometimes I have a hard time getting past the awkwardness, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I just don't want to ask that question because I don't want to be weird and I don't want them to feel weird and it's
Hmm.
just awkward. So we're just gonna talk about sport. Um, but like talking about God is weird
Yeah.
to me. It's hard.
Yeah.
But to open up the Bible, like that kind of takes it
Yeah.
to the next step. And
It
so,
does. It
and
does.
so like, why don't you tell me how, like, how would you advise a mentor, like, hey, here's a good way to seamlessly get you and your mentee to open up the Bible together.
Yeah. Um, I also suffer from awkwardness. Right? So I totally get it. This is not me being all like, I am the perfect youth pastor theologian, and let me tell all you irresponsible people how to, like, yeah, I mean, I've had so many conversations with kids over the years that I've just really struggled with how do I lead this um in a spiritual biblical direction. Um and I think part of it has to do with before you ever get together. Like what are we meeting for? Um and again, my experiences as a youth pastor, so listeners are coming from different backgrounds and situations. Um but for me it was hey, I want to get to know you and I want to help you follow Jesus. Is there some time when we can get together? Right? I mean, as a youth pastor, when a teenager gets together with me, they're assuming that I'm going to talk to them about Jesus. And there was a period of time when I wanted to be the cool youth pastor. And so I was like, I'm not going to do what they expect. I'm going to like play it different, right? Like bust up their expectations. Um, and then like it got to the point where we'd get together every how often, and now we've gotten together for the last 2 years and we never talk about faith because I'm trying to be the cool youth pastor and I don't want to like just like, be so cliche. Um and that's like I wasted all that time. Like there were so many opportunities to help them think biblically or Christianly or to apply the gospel to things that that we'd talked about. And I'm the one who was kind of resistant to it. And yeah, I kind of just came to the point where I was like, you know what? If kids are expecting me to talk about Jesus, then I shouldn't disappoint them. Um, so if the kids who you're mentoring, you know them from church, whether you're a youth leader or if they're, one of your kids' friends that you're taking an interest in, and um, if you think that they're assuming that you're going to talk about faith, then it might still feel awkward, but don't disappoint them, right? Like they agreed to get together with you with the
True.
assumption that you're going to ask about their relationship with Jesus or the Bible or something, right? So is it gonna still be awkward? Yeah. Yeah, it is. Um, and they knew that too. And they still said, yeah, I'll meet you for ice cream. So sometimes you just gotta go for it and just ask the awkward question. And I don't know, I mean, sometimes you just start off with, hey, how can I be praying for you? Right? I mean, that's a natural question. That's not a super intimidating question. How can I be praying for you? And they're probably going to give you a really safe prayer request about a test that they have coming up. Um, and you might feel disappointed that oh, it's just a test. Okay. It's something. They're giving you something. Take it seriously. And if the test is on Wednesday, then set a reminder in your phone, "Hey, pray for Zach's math test you know, on Wednesday," and then send them a text after school, not during school. Send them a text after school and just say, like, "Hey, Zach, was praying for your math test today. Hope it went well." They might not reply. They probably won't. They might just give you like a thumbs up, or a thank you or whatever. But what's that say to them, right? That says, "Oh, like, Mike actually remembered that I had a math test today, and he prayed for me."
Yeah.
So now next time you get together, you ask, "Hey, how can I be praying for you?" They might still say, "Now it's a science test." Do that enough times, and if you remember their prayer requests, they will start opening up with other weightier requests. Um, it's questions too, like, hey, if you could ask God anything, what would you ask him? Right? Like, one of the things that I loved to ask kids as the youth pastor is, hey, if you were in charge of youth group and if you could decide the next youth group series, what would you want to talk about? Right? It doesn't mean that that's always what the next series was. Um, but we were able to have really good conversations about that. And then I was able to unfold that into part of a lesson or whatever. Right. So that way they still felt heard, they were heard. Um, but it gets them thinking and it gives you a little bit of an open window to see spiritually what's going on behind the scenes.
And just anything that you can do to get them talking about Jesus
Yeah.
and talking about their faith or talking about the questions they have or the doubts that they have. And um, yeah, I mean, I think that you're just tossing out seeds and you just never know which seed is going to turn into a conversation that is super fruitful. And so, um, if a mentee is interested in the Bible and they're like, yeah, like I would love to talk about the Bible. What like what are some of the best like books in the Bible, or what are some of the best kinds of stories that are good to start with?
Yeah, people go to John a lot, but I found John is very abstract and philosophical. So I go to Mark. The Gospel of Mark is just so full of miracles and Jesus's power. Um, and so yeah, Mark is Mark and Luke. Luke has a lot of miracles and parables. Mark has a lot of miracles. It's very fast paced and it's short. So in terms of gospels, I think those are good. I also really love First John. So reading through First John together, um, it's a little bit more practical. Uh, and it's shorter than something like Romans and Ephesians. Those are very heady theological books that I think are very important. But if you're just starting off reading a book with students, um, I might think either Mark or Luke, followed by First John or maybe Philippians, because those are both also very short, very practical um, epistles. So yeah.
Man, Mike, and just I understand that, you know, praying with your mentee and talking about God and talking about the Bible, like all of these things, like you have to face the fear of man. Like you have to face the fact that you might get rejected. Um, but like what are some of the common obstacles besides those two? And tell me some of the best ways that you've seen people try to overcome those.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think some of it's just our own insecurity,
Yeah.
um, or their insecurity. Um, do I am I too afraid of looking like an idiot? Am I too afraid of them asking a question that I don't know the answer to? Um, do I feel this sense of like imposter syndrome? Like they're gonna find out that I'm not actually as good of a Christian as they think I am. I think these are real insecurities that we need to face. And so I'm not talking down on them like, oh, just get over it. Like, but submit those insecurities before the Lord and trust Him to use you, even in the midst of you feeling like maybe you will have to say, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know to a bunch of the questions that you're gonna get asked. Um, and that's okay if you say, I don't know. It's even better to say, I don't know, but let's figure it out together. right? And then take that seriously. Um, I think one of the issues too is our own godliness. If there is hidden sin in our own lives that we are not dealing with, um, then we are going to be less confident, less passionate, less interested in having spiritual conversations just because of our own sense of guilt, conviction, hypocrisy, those types of things. So I think we need to keep guard of our own faith and to walk in light of the gospel, recognizing the gospel is not do more, do better, try harder, be holier. But the gospel is a message of God's grace and mercy for sinners. And because of that, we can repent with freedom and we can confess our sin with confidence that it has been atoned for, that the blood of Christ has set us free. And so, because of our freedom, we're able to um, live with some transparency, right? Again, appropriate transparency with our kids. Um, so yeah, I think those are some. And again, maybe a selfish plug. But one resource that I've been able to produce is a book called Discover, Questioning Your Way to Faith. And so it's a short little book that I wrote for teenagers, about 20 of the most common questions teenagers ask and struggle with. And each chapter is 4 or 5 pages long. It's really short. And each chapter also has a few discussion questions at the end of it. So that way, if you want to have a conversation, spiritual conversation with students, and you're not really sure how, I think the book's got a pretty cool cover too. Pick up 2 copies of the book and say, "Hey, I just heard about this book. Seems really cool." Um, you don't need to read through the book, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. Give the kid the book and say, "Hey, interested in kind of working through this? You know, which which of these questions have you asked before?" And I think it might be pretty cool for us to each read that chapter before the next time we get together and then talk about it.
Well, in anytime that you have something that you're holding, like a book or something like that, it
Yeah.
just makes it so much easier. And
Yeah.
so,
It's so much safer. It feels
oh man,
safer. Yeah.
yes, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Those,
Oh, one last question, one last suggestion
yeah,
that
please,
I just thought about this.
yeah,
Um, so I guess this is going back to how do you spark conversations about faith and spirituality with kids? Is I like to use the hypothetical peer as a question tactic. So because if I'm meeting with you as a teen and you're a teenager, and if I say, "Hey Zach, what are some questions that you have about God?" That might feel very pointed and direct, and for you to be like, "Oh, well, I'm the pastor's son, and so I can't really talk with," or, "Oh, you're my youth pastor, or my Sunday school teacher," right? Um, Sometimes it might be appropriate to ask that directly. Sometimes I'll say, "Hey, Zach, what are some questions that other teenagers in your school might have for God?" With the unspoken acknowledgement that you are answering based upon yourself.
right,
But I've
right,
removed it one step from you, but it's still in your peer circle, right? So it's a
mm,
hypothetical peer, right? Like,
yep.
so talk to me. So how do you think a teenager in your school might respond to this scenario, or what do they think about? I use that tactic a lot, and so that just sparks back to my mind.
That's a pro move right there, Mike.
Yeah,
Yeah, for sure. All right, this will be my last one. But so I think one thing that God has been showing me as of late is, and man, I've been doing this for a long time now, and I'm amazed at how much I still try to be their friend. It's just the craziest thing. Like want kids to think I'm cool and I want kids, but what he's shown me is like, hey, look, like, you know, what is the role that only you can play? Like if say your mentee doesn't have a dad around, and like you really are the only man in your life who is talking about these things. Like if your kids or if a kid in your community had a mentor and you got to spend some time with that mentor before they spent time with that kid, what are some of the things that you would help them remember in regards to their role and like how they come to the relationship that might be helpful?
Ah, that's a difficult question. So, advice for the mentor who's stepping in for kids who really just don't have reliable adult figures in their lives, right? Um, I would I would guard against setting yourself up as being cooler or better or more trustworthy and reliable than the other adults who have let them down. Um, even if the other, even if the kid is like, "Oh man, I wish you were my dad," or um, if the kid makes statements affirming you as better than the other adults in their life, that's going to stoke your ego, right? It just it is, it will. I'm not making a judgment about if that's right or wrong. It will. Um, but you got to be really careful to not agree with them because you don't want to boost yourself onto a pedestal by climbing over other people's backs. Just be faithful to them and just care for them and let that be the reward, right? Like let that be what it means for the Lord to use you to care for them. Um, if if they have parents who have not been there, or maybe they've been there in negative ways, um, yeah, just pray for wisdom about how to appropriately talk about or not talk about their parents or other adult figures who have not been there. That can get really slippery and complicated pretty quickly. And so I would just be careful about that because I do think that there's a temptation for us as mentors to, we want the affirmation that, hey, like I'm inconveniencing myself a lot for this kid. So they better be thankful for me, right? Like, that's real. So just be very careful about how that feeds and stokes your own sense of ego, of coolness. Um, if if you were not cool as a teenager and now a teenager suddenly thinks that you're the bee's knees, um, right? I mean,
Mm.
y y that's a really dangerous position to put yourself into. Um, and so you gotta be really careful about that. It used to be primarily, with, uh, you know, guys and girls. Now it's even same gender. It is not doesn't have the same protections, that maybe, a couple decades ago, things seemed safer or whatnot. That from a non-Christian standpoint, it can seem really creepy and weird for adults to be hanging out with teenagers who are not their kids or are not related to them. Um, and so you just need to be aware of that and guard against that. Don't let that keep you away from investing in kids. But do let it encourage you to have real good safeguards in
Mhm.
place and to protect against the appearance of sketchiness and untrustworthiness.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
just speak truth, speak life, speak hope, um, with honesty and integrity, not with fluff, not with flattery, not empty affirmation, but meaningful affirmation to kids is what they need. Kids know when you're just kind of, puffing them up, with empty flattery. And I think sometimes we can be tempted to do that in youth mentoring and youth discipleship. Give meaningful and thoughtful encouragements and affirmations. Um, specific compliments are always better received than grandiose, broad generalities, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, those are some thoughts that come to mind.
Man, that's good stuff, Mike. Man, well, thank you so much for hopping on the pod today and talking to us about God and about the Bible and how to spend time with kiddos and how to how to you know figure out a way to overcome the hard, overcome the weird, and to talk about God and to talk about Jesus and to help disciple these kids, right? To help them love God with all their heart and with all their soul. And so, man, just super thankful for you. Why don't you tell people how they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on today, and really,
Sure.
really thankful for you and getting to know you too. You can find me at youthpastortheologian.com, or on social media at youththeologian. You can find me there, and I run those accounts too. So if you send a DM or whatever, and my email address is on the website too. So I'm happy to come alongside and support churches and youth workers. And so you can find out more about the blog, podcast. We do some training seminars to help youth pastors teach the Bible to teenagers. And you can find out more at youthpastortheologian.com.
It's awesome, Mike. And we can pick up those books on good old Amazon, right? Is that
Yep.
right?
Yep. You can go on Amazon. They're all linked on the website
That's
as
great.
well.
It's awesome, man. All right. Well, Mike, thank you so much for the conversation, man. And I sure hope that it helps people remember that you can mentor.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man. See ya.